The genre of war in film is always an exciting and sometimes educating experience. It seems as if, over the years, a majority of the war films that have been created tend to portray the events of certain conflicts. From World War One and Two, Vietnam, to the American Civil War, they have all had their fair share of blockbuster films throughout time. Some of us moviegoers, like myself, often wonder, why do we not make more films on the American Revolution? Is there a reason filmmakers stay away from it? Does the common audience not connect? Is it the time frame of which the war was fought? Tonight, we take the battlefield for a discussion of sorts as we talk about the who, what, when, why, and hows of the Revolutionary War and the world of cinema. This is a Comic Talkers production, and you are listening to Just for Flicks. What's going on, guys? It's your boy Patty B. With me today, or as always, is my right hand man in the battlefield tonight, Mr. B Dog, Mr. Brandon. What's going on, man? How you doing?
You need your right hand man back.
I do have my right hand man back, and that's a perfect time to insert that joke. That was good.
Even though that's not historically accurate as well, I
Well,
am doing fantastic. And I am glad to bring on a comic talker co-host of mine for this podcast. When I brought this idea to her, she went, I'm in, let's do this. Please welcome for the first time ever to the podcast, Mary. Mary, how are you doing?
I'm good. I was very excited when you brought this up. And we sort of talked about this on the Comic Talkers podcast, but I don't know how much overlap there is in listeners. Um, so I actually presented to the American Historical Association on topics regarding the American Revolution back in 20 back in 2020. And so if for those of you who aren't in the know, that is the largest history conference in the United States. I also attended a school that George Washington personally helped found, and I used to work at Mount Vernon, so I'm kind of uniquely qualified to talk about this particular topic.
Now,
she could not be out revolutioned.
It's not even my favorite part of history. I just am weirdly drawn to it.
Pat, you really got to stop with your dad puns. But good point to bring up, because when it comes to the American Revolution, Mary and I have talked about it a while back. When it really comes to this, is the, if not the most pivotal point in American history. This is
It is the beginning of our national mythology.
Exactly.
A lot happens in that time frame. Sure.
And to be totally honest, I hate to say it, and we'll get into it later because you'll hear how much Mary and I do not care for the movie. Really, the last big movie we ever got of the American Revolution, other than shows and TV movies, was The Patriot. Cat loves it.
I do. I love it for certain reasons. I'm not going to sit here and say it's one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm not going to say that, but is it a bad movie in my eyes? Absolutely not. Is it a little long? Absolutely. So.
And is it not historically accurate? Yes, it's not historically accurate.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% not historically accurate.
But it's a sad thing because we've gotten movies from about the Civil War that's pretty historically accurate. We've had war movies that have been pretty historically accurate from that time frame.
Yep.
But the sad thing is, when it comes to the American Revolution, the only things we really get close to being accurate are movies that are not even based about the war itself. It is more about the governmental issues than everything like that. Like John Adams is a perfect one of that, 2008.
The John Adams miniseries is impeccable. It's really good.
It is. And Paul Giamatti in that role is amazing.
So you guys would know more about, I've seen some episodes, I've not seen the whole series itself, but I do hear a lot of good things about it. Is it considered historic, or do you guys see it historically accurate for what happened?
It's very well researched. It obviously takes liberties, as does every screen adaptation of anything involving the past, especially the 18th century, because let's just say that the 18th century is really well known for propaganda, which means there a lot of people are just making things up. Philip Freneau and the British Prison Ship, my 16-page epic poem, enemy of my senior capstone. It's not very good. So a lot of people are making things up, right? That's especially around the American Revolution, propagandists are huge in this period, because printing is huge in the colonies. And pretty much anyone can get anything printed if you are loud enough and have a little bit of money. Um, and so that kind of leads into people just kind of saying stuff. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be persuasive, which is how you get things like the colonists thinking that they're being like taxed beyond belief when they're getting asked to pay back the crown for a war that they started, as they are paying the lowest taxes in the British Empire.
That's, that's why I said there are movies and shows that have depicted this. You have John Adams, which we've talked about with Paul Giamatti. You have even Revolution, which, Pat, I'm kind of curious if you've watched that one because of who's
I haven't seen that.
What's that, right? You said
Revolution, and it stars Al Pacino and Donald Sutherland.
I was looking this up earlier. I saw it had a 10% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I was like, man, do I really need to entertain watching this? I mean, I should give it
a low score too, buddy. So
I had 63%.
that's still like a D in my book. That's still not a really good passing grade.
D for diploma, baby. Um, but no, I saw Revolution, and I saw a still of Al Pacino, and I just could not take it seriously. Like, how do you go from Tony Montana to Revolutionary War?
I believe Scarface was before this too.
I'm saying, like, yeah, it's 83, I think, was Scarface, and this movie was 85, 86, I believe. Yeah. So I haven't got a chance to see it. I was kind of looking through it while I was doing some research for tonight and whatnot, but it just kind of struck me as an oddball film.
And you have other movies like more Disney or like TV movies like April Morning, which is Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah.
You have The Crossing with Jeff Daniels, which I have to ask Mary, because Jeff Daniels has not only been an American Revolutionary War film, but he's also been in a couple of Civil War films as Colonel Joseph Chamberlain. What's your take on Jeff Daniels and his takes in depictions of history?
I prefer him as Chamberlain.
Yes.
I feel like it suits him better.
Mm-hmm.
But I also am just generally, I do like Chamberlain in general. It's kind of hard not to like Chamberlain if you know anything about the American Civil War. So I mean, for me, what really boils down to a decent like historical adaptation, I think on some level the acting is important. I mean, obviously on social media now there's like this like, oh, they have iPhone face. And like, yeah, some people are definitively more suited for like what we think of as like beauty standard for different eras based on the portraiture, but like faces are just faces.
Yeah.
Everyone has had like people are people. With the exception of like cosmetic surgery, like most of these things have been around forever. It's just different facial features that are prevalent in different families. And so I don't really necessarily know that I think there's a particular look or anything like that. As long as your costuming is decent and you are able to understand the material that you are playing. I think that was one of the strengths he really had with Chamberlain. But I feel like the Revolution is so mythologized that it is hard for people who do not study it to really get the gravity of what the revolution is. There is a trend fairly recently in the historiography. So again, for the layperson, historiography is the study of the thinking about history. Mm-hmm. This is where we're looking at different historical schools of thought and how we approach looking at different subjects. And so the historiography around the revolution has very much moved to critiquing this sort of bloodless revolution that has sort of been mythologized. But like we hear about the shot heard around the world, and we hear about like, like all of these different battles, but we don't think about the fact that people were actually dying. Mm-hmm. It's not like with the Civil War, we of course hear about like Bloody Sunday, and I live near Antietam, and so we have everything with Antietam. Um, and so there is a focus and an emphasis in later wars about the death and the violence. Even the War of 1812 with the burning of the White House, there is a focus on the violence and the cruelty. And we do not overwhelmingly get that narrative with the revolution because it has been so mythologized and sort of falsified into this pure, completely innocent, almost birth of the nation.
Right.
And so I feel like that's just kind of the downfall of most adaptations of the revolution, is that they are either bloodless or they are creating false acts of extreme violence.
AKA.
And there really isn't any in between. And when there is in between, they are doing really weird things.
Like,
And I will get to that later.
now, there's some other movies they did. Disney, I did not know this happened. Actually, Johnny Tremaine. I've never heard of this movie. It's a Disney movie. And it was Johnny Tremaine. It was 1959. I believe it was in the 50s. So this was Walt Disney still trying to find his realm a little bit. Like the lands were already made, but this is when Davy Crockett's coming out and all that kind of stuff is coming out at this time frame. So The Patriot. We'll cut to that later. The Devil's Disciple. If you guys have never watched this, I recommend this. It has one of my favorite actors, Burt Lancaster, but it also has Kirk Douglas, and it's a really good film. And one of Mary's favorites, 1776, which is okay. Well, let me ask you this. I have to ask the hard question: is it a better musical than Hamilton?
Without a doubt. And I think this is someone who enjoys Hamilton. I don't dislike Hamilton, do not get me wrong. I think Hamilton is very revolutionary for musical theater. There is a reason it's as popular as it is. It is a little overhyped. There are other musicals that do the same kind of style, even ones written by Lin-Manuel Miranda, that do it a little bit better. I think In the Heights is a little better than Hamilton. Because Miranda's writing from his own experience and not just taking one biography of Alexander Hamilton and then flubbing some things and then completely ignoring the actual implications of slavery within his musical. Anyway, 1776 is infinitely better. And I think what makes 1776 interesting is that for most of the musical, you think it's telling you the bloodless revolution. Pat, have you seen 1776?
I've seen part. Okay, so I have not seen it all the way through. I have seen snippets. I do know Mr. Feeney is in it. From
William Daniels. Yep.
Yeah, William Daniels. Yeah, I knew his name was something Daniels, but I've seen parts of it. It's good. It's, I think, filmed in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Okay.
So and it's really well researched, which I think is one of the most exciting things. So it's coming out around the time that thought processes are shifting from viewing the founding fathers as sort of infallible to a time where around the bicentennial, and we're really starting to do deep introspectives into the fact that the majority of our founding fathers were plantation owners. And the ways in which the original drafts of the Declaration of Independence were significantly more abolitionist leaning, and then how those got turned into the Declaration of Independence that leads into the sort of culture that creates the Three-Fifths Compromise. And that's why Molasses to Rum to Slaves is like the best song in the whole show, because they really wanted to emphasize that these are gentlemen, but they are not gentle men.
Right.
And they are all complicit, even the abolitionists, in the continuation of the institution of chattel slavery. If you have not seen that scene, it is bone-chilling. It is incredible. But for most, even including Molasses to Rum, we are not exposed to any violence of the war. We are not really even exposed to the casual violence of the 18th century until Mama Look Sharp. And so Mama Look Sharp is essentially, they have a errand boy, a page boy for the army, who keeps coming into the Continental Congress to pass along messages. And Mama Look Sharp is a chance. He is sharing essentially one of his childhood friends' last moments on the battlefield as the boy is crying out for his mother. And so Mama Look Sharp is really where we are first really exposed to the idea that men are dying. Before that, we just know that the Continental Army is low on morale, they're not getting paid, they don't have a lot of food. And then we really sort of see the toll it is taking on the people who are actually serving. And we can very much see the petty differences between the landowning elite that are in the Continental Congress, such as all of these squabbles over how much alcohol they're allowed to drink. We see all of their fine clothes. We see like just the petty nonsense they're getting into. Like Thomas Jefferson doesn't want to write the Declaration because his wife isn't there and he misses her. So they bring his wife from Virginia to Philadelphia. Um, and then you see like a 16-year-old boy who just watched his best friend die, and it puts everything into perspective. And it comes at the end of the show.
You know, and you brought up a good point earlier, Mary, that the American Revolution is so mythologized, or I'm trying to find I'm trying to pronounce how you said it, like mythologized. Like
Yeah.
we don't, it's not like where we have the Civil War and we have 1812, where we have things of documentation through the war. We have some.
There's better documentation, I think, right? And that's what it is.
Yeah,
It's
there's a lot of better
documentation.
documentation. I think there is too. So much like the Civil War, where after the war we have this kind of genre of like invented military service where people are trying to like write memoirs about their time in the war and they never served.
Well, see,
Or
like
none of the things that they're saying happened. They're just trying to make money because the war was really, really big and it impacted like everybody. And if they did really cool stuff, people are going to buy the book. We have kind of similar things coming out of the revolution, but a lot of them tend to be kind of inflated like POW stories.
yeah, like, well, I think that's a good example. Like when we brought up Jeff Daniels, right? Jeff Daniels played George Washington in The Crossing, and The Crossing, it's like, yeah, he did decent, but when you look at the performances he put on with Chamberlain, Chamberlain has a lot of documentation on him.
Chamberlain is a remarkably, he writes a lot.
Yeah, he has.
I mean, he's a teacher, so like that's gonna happen. But
like he has books and everything out about his time, even from the current, going from a teacher to a colonel to
yeah,
a general. Like it's
and there are some, but when we're looking at the revolution, we are looking at a time before compulsory education for those outside of New England. We are looking at a soldier base that is almost entirely illiterate. We are looking at a soldier base that cannot even afford shoes, let alone paper, pen, and quill. This is pre even early industry in the United States. And so we really just don't have like the means to create the amount of paper that would be needed to document the war on the same level as we're seeing with the American Civil War.
That's a good point. I never even thought of it like that.
And so a lot of the documentation that we get tends to be from generals. It tends to be from politicians and civilians. So we're seeing a lot how civilians are impacted. There's a lot of really great work, like home front content, which is why things like Turn, Washington Spies, which was on AMC for like ever, it feels like. So I Turn is so good because we have a weird amount of documentation on the spy rings.
yeah, it's weird because I remember reading a book about that. Of course,
The Culper spy ring is like really, really cool. I personally, so my Roman Empire, as the youth say, I say as I'm only 25. My Roman Empire is, so you guys know about Nathan Hale, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Nathan Hale was college best friends with Benjamin Talmadge, who became the spy master of the Culper spy ring. And the Culper spy ring was created because of Hale's death. And Talmadge had to convince the army to let him do it.
I think I remember reading a book about this, and I think, what was it? Brad Metzler did it, which is really weird because Mary and I, if you guys go listen to us on Comic Talkers, you'll see we have a love-hate relationship with Brad Metzler.
His history stuff is a lot better than his Green Arrows.
Oh yeah, yes, especially.
I when I worked at an elementary school, I used to show his like secret museum, Xavier Riddle of the Secret Museum show. It's on PBS, I think. I used to show it to the kids and they loved it. It was great. It was like a little treat for me because I got to like have them sit down and watch something, and I also got to enjoy what they were watching.
But going back to what we were talking about here, the mythology of it all, and what they mythologize, yeah, in the American Revolution, I think that's why we don't get good movies. The only movies that we really get from here that are really good, it's like we said, John Adams' little TV miniseries on HBO, really well done. You know, but you have all this other stuff that we don't really know a lot about the people.
So, another thing about it is that and there are some academic historians who will vehemently disagree with me on this, and there are others like Cole Jones at Purdue University who will agree with me quite heavily. I worked with Cole Jones. He actually sent me a copy of his book to use for my thesis because he also studied POWs in the Revolution. Wonderful man, very, very nice. But for a lot of historians, the more you learn about the American Revolution, the less you side with the Americans.
I wouldn't doubt it, honestly. I mean,
and it's not just because they are essentially throwing the world's largest temper tantrum. Because the thing is that George Washington starts the 7 Years' War, more commonly known here in the States as the French and Indian War. He starts that. That's him. This is the guy we made our first president.
I remember my teacher bringing this up in college, doing that, and that's what he says. George.
And like it's explicitly him. And it's really funny because a lot of the reason that a lot of, especially Southern leaders in the American Revolution decided they wanted to break away was not necessarily because they wanted independence. It's because they were mad that the British aristocracy did not consider them one of them. They weren't considered British aristocracy, like their distant cousins across the ocean, and they were mad about that.
Pretty much.
It's like a huge factor in a lot of the like social cultural issues around the revolution. And of course, they're paying the least taxes in the entire British Empire. There are many places within England itself that have no representation in Parliament. America was not unique. And it was significantly harder logistically for them to have representation than like other places within England. And they knew that those places did not have representation. And so like the more you learn about the revolution, the less you side politically with the colonists, because they're also like, well, why can't we have Ohio? And the British are like, we literally just fought a 7-year war about why you can't have Ohio. You know why we can't have Ohio. Don't go over there.
And it's a good point to bring up because it's one of those things that I agree with you. And for fans that don't know, like Mary said, she has her degree in history and everything like that. I'm working on my stuff and I'm working on a degree for that. So for me to hear that too, it's like, yeah, when you really listen to everything that you hear about the American Revolution, some ways you want to side with America in this case.
And that's one of the reasons why John Adams is such a controversial figure in American history. Because of course the Alien Sedition Act his presidency sucked. He was a terrible president. He never should have been president. But as a colonial lawyer, John Adams can get it. That man was great. Everything he did surrounding the Boston Massacre, which was not a massacre of anyone but the British, phenomenal. He actually knew the law and applied it. And it made him a lot of enemies among his fellow colonists because he recognized that they were doing bad things.
Yeah. Now, Pat, let's ask that question to you, because I know, like, for us, I think, like Mary and I, we've come from that aspect of history. In your take in just movies, why do you feel like the American Revolution is not really targeted?
I've thought of it before, and I think it kind of has to go to the way war was back then, right? I mean, it's let's just compare it to like a World War II scene, right? I think for the war movie goers or the war movie watchers, like myself, I like action, right? I know this is me sounding like a child right now, but I like explosions. No, but what I'm saying to this point is, I I I think they can make a good Revolutionary War movie. I just don't think they've done it yet. And as far as why they haven't yet, um, it's how can they tell it and make it entertaining, you know? I like as far
And
as
I
how,
feel, and that's really a skill issue.
yeah. I mean, I think you just got to have the right story, and I don't think anyone's willing to put in forth the effort to have something accurate. You know what I mean? Like maybe they could have. I mean, I think that's what they did with the Patriot. I mean, they had to sprinkle in their own falses, right? I mean, I don't know in particular. We're gonna get into it, obviously, but as far as I mean, I could tell there were some things just from watching that movie, like obviously this doesn't seem accurate at all, or this doesn't seem right, or anything, you know. But I just don't think anyone's had the means yet to want to do and spend the time on something accurate and do it right. So,
I Yeah, and I feel another one of the issues with the lack of media surrounding the revolution, and I feel like this is something that I don't know that we've talked about or thought about yet,
mhm,
but really the war film genre starts with World War II.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note that World War II movies were being made during World War II.
Yeah.
And so that really kind of kickstarts the genre in general. And then World War One has kind of had a resurgence of late. We didn't have a whole lot of World War One movies
we
prior
did.
to around the 100-year anniversary of World War One.
Yeah.
Crazy how that works when 100 years pass and we think about things again. Um, but I think that um, we have to keep in mind too that like photography was fairly new when the American Civil War happened. So
Mhm,
we are looking at we are looking at events that have been either televised, have already had movies made about them in the time period that is happening, or where we have photographic documentation,
mhm.
which means it's easier to recreate.
That makes
Um,
sense. I mean, yeah,
and
yeah.
a lot of the earliest Civil War movies were kind of being championed by like the children and grandchildren of Civil War veterans.
Yeah.
Because it really wasn't all that long ago when they were first starting to come out. And if you think about it, the movies that tend to dominate what we perceive as the war movie genre are World War II and Vietnam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Vietnam, which is infamous for being the first openly televised conflict, and World War II, which had movies being made about it while it was happening.
Mhm.
The Korean War is the forgotten war, kind of with the exception of MASH,
Yes.
which is an anti-war media, which is not really a kind of war media we get very often, which is why MASH is kind of hard to replicate and also the perfect encapsulation of everything with Korea because we never should have been there.
Mhm.
Great,
We never
great
should
show,
have been in
though.
Vietnam either, but that was a different story. Um, but you can kind of tell like where the focus is, and it tends to be on things that we have already seen that exist in popular consciousness.
Well, you bring up another good point too, because I kind of want to bring this up because I thought this the same way when I was doing my notes for this. When it comes to the American Revolution, it's, like we said, the mythologies of it all and everything. That's why I feel like we don't see movies even about the Spanish American War. It's why we don't
Yeah,
see it.
I was gonna say we have no movies about the War of 1812. We have there's no media for the 7 Years War.
No.
Mexican American War, what is that? As far
Yeah.
as most Americans
Yeah.
know, it never happened, right? Like
And then like
we
the Spanish American War, which
we
yeah,
don't have movies for these. We don't have shows for these. And I feel like that's one of those things where like the Europeans really have a leg up on us when it comes to period dramas because by God, they put in effort.
yeah. That when you
I don't
really
know if you guys have seen like The Empress on Netflix, but it's pretty good.
You actually got me into that one because I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch this, and I actually
I've watched it in German and in English now, and it's really good in both
I
languages,
won't
which is
take it too far to watch it in German, but I
great.
did.
Okay, well, I speak German, so we're yeah. Um,
But you bring up that's why I want to bring that up because I've talked to Mary about this before in the past. One of my favorite figures, of course, in history is Theodore Roosevelt, and that's where he's famous from, the Spanish American Revolution or the Spanish American War.
Mhm.
And when you really see it, you don't really see much about it. And again, I hate to say it this way, but I don't know how else to say it. It's all mythologized. It's all that side of this is
and
what
if
we
you're
did.
going to talk about the Spanish American War, the only thing you ever hear about is Theodore Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, and you only hear just Theodore Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, and that's where the discussion ends. They don't even tell you what they did; they
They
just
don't
tell
tell
you
you how
they
the
were
war started.
there.
Don't tell you how any of that even began.
You don't learn anything about it. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, he was there. What did he do though?
Yeah, and he's become one of these public figures, just like you look at George Washington. When you look at people like that, it's that American icon that you want. But even in realization too, Theodore Roosevelt. If I hate to say it this way, but I'm going to say it, he's one of my favorite presidents of all time. Roosevelt, I feel, would not be president if McKinley was still alive.
I mean,
VP. He's a VP for a reason. And even though he did good things for the nation, and he took a bullet and still said a said
his
his speech.
speech.
But that's the whole thing. When it comes to the American Revolution, that's where I kind of view it too. It's like for the tales that we get, we got Hamilton recently, and that's probably the recent more thing that we could talk about nowadays is Hamilton. Hamilton
Mhm.
is a big thing in American culture now, but there are so many inaccuracies in this, and you can tell it from the beginning of the play. Some things. I'm not
And
saying that, but
I again, like I said, when Pat was talking, people aren't putting in the effort to make it interesting. It's a huge skill issue. The American Revolution had
mhm.
a
Wait,
submarine in the 1770s. It didn't
That's
go very well, but
I was
there
like, that
was one.
sounds so sketch. Could you imagine?
It
Hold on.
was.
Let's
It
let's
was
let's,
very sketchy.
let's pump the brakes first. Could you imagine being living in those times, right? Being this, 17-year-old kid. Oh yeah, hey, we're gonna this makeshift submarine that Thomas
It
just built
gets better.
300
This was like
ago.
a 40-year-old man.
Dude, this just
A
seems
40
so
year like a
sketch.
40-year-old man got in this machine that he made. It's
People
called The
people thought
Turtle. There's a
people
Liberties Kids episode about it. You can watch it on YouTube. It's great. But there are so many, like, you could make an entire movie about Nathan Hale's failures as a spy. People love spy movies.
Yep.
So many people would watch a movie just because it's American Revolution, because, there's always that guy who wants us to watch a war movie anytime it comes out.
Mhm.
There are so many people who want to watch things just because it's the American Revolution.
Mhm.
And like there are so many different things and figures that you can focus on with the revolution to make it interesting, and they just don't. Like like Joseph Warren, like I hate to talk about my guy. He's my favorite little guy. My college history friends made fun of me when we went to the Museum of the American Revolution because I looked for him in every exhibit. Um and um but like he literally gave a Boston Massacre speech that he had to have Paul Revere help heft him into a window to get into the Old South Meeting House, Old South Church in Boston, and he had to climb through a window. He was wearing a toga to give this speech.
Huh.
And he presented himself as an allegorical America, as an orphaned child. This man was 35 at the time and had 4 children of his own. And like, like and he goes on to martyr himself at the Battle of Breeds Hill, commonly known as Bunker Hill, because he knows he shouldn't be a general, but he's popular in Boston. He's a member of the Sons of Liberty, and he knows he got his position through politics and not through any actual war experience. And so he forces all of his men to go past him and holds the line himself, and is massacred and is just completely obliterated. And that's
Mhm.
why he's a martyr. He's a martyr to the point that Benedict Arnold, post traitor behavior, personally funds the education of his 4 children. Benedict Arnold was like, this guy who I don't agree with on anything, I like him enough, I'm going to pay for all 4 of his children to become successful adults. You could do so many things if you put in any effort. And so we had sort of mentioned, like, very briefly before we started recording, like, there are really, really good miniseries. Like the John Adams miniseries is great. Turn is a TV show, but it was also still pretty good.
Mhm.
And then there are the not so good miniseries, some of which are produced by things like the History Channel. And I say this as someone who forced my parents to watch this miniseries with me while it was coming out when I was in high school. And this is the Sons of Liberty miniseries put out by the History Channel, and I did force my mom to watch it with me because it had Joseph Warren in it, and everyone forgets he exists. um, but like it's so odd because they were just like, what celebrities can we grab for this? They weren't even trying to not mythologize it. They were actively playing into public misconceptions. They made Sam Adams be played by Ben Barnes. I don't know if you guys have seen anything else with Sam Adams. Even on the beer, he is an old man. Ben Barnes was, I think, maybe 27
Yep.
at
This is,
the time.
I believe that was off his time as Prince Caspian in Chronicles of Narnia.
It was maybe like 10 years after that. Maybe. Like he was not and like I don't even want to know what was the only series to actually like show what was happening in Boston. Um like it's really weird because it does some things really, really well, and then it does other things like the worst I've ever seen them. And it's all happening in like the same 3-episode miniseries.
So
And it's just this always seems to be the case with the revolution in particular.
Mhm. Agreed.
And I don't like, part of it is the national mythology, and then part of it is just I just don't think people want to know more. I feel like it's been talked up so much in American popular culture that even if there is no pop culture to talk about, like the idea of the revolution is kind of its own like religion almost in a lot of ways, and people don't want to learn more, and so they don't, and then they have no desire to look beyond the narrative they've been sold.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Agreed. Now,
I mean, being from Maryland, like if I have to explain one more time to one more person that the Star Spangled Banner was not written during the Revolution, as someone who lives less than an hour from where that man lived and worked,
yeah.
I'm going to lose it. I'm going to lose it.
But you know, that was kind of my main thing. It's like when you look at wars like this, you got even the Civil War hasn't put out a lot, but yet those movies tend to be more popular.
Mhm.
Yeah, Gettysburg Glory is another great movie. You have
I think too part of that is that post Civil War, and I don't know how much you guys know about this because again this is me being the obnoxious historian. Uh, but post Civil War, there was a huge effort amongst veterans of the Civil War, even into the early 20th century when many of them were still in their 90s. Obviously, Reconstruction was super messy,
yeah.
but that was mostly politicians.
Mhm.
And of course, obviously, like the extremely violent bigots. But a lot of the veterans of the Civil War had a huge push for unity. They were really the ones who were pushing this brother on brother narrative. And then you have people like Shelby Foote, who should never be in documentaries. Ken Burns, why did you do this? Um, and pushing, of course, like with the Daughters of the Confederacy and their lost cause narratives that are completely ahistorical and nonsensical and do not at all reflect the documentary evidence. And so you sort of have like these pushes for for unity, and that lead to what can be perceived by some as benevolent lies, that push for this unity, that then create sort of this national concept that we, after the struggle and strife, we came back together. Whereas with the revolution, we broke apart, and then we expelled thousands of people.
Now, I do feel like there is a movie that, to me, kind of set the tone for why there isn't a lot of movies made nowadays with this. And we're gonna let Pat go first and talk about this because
Why do I gotta go first? Don't put the pressure on me.
because you
Because
are
you're the only one who likes it.
Yeah, it's common. Like, so in 2000, The Patriot came out. Stars Mel Gibson, Jason Isaacs. List can go on and on with this movie. That it was just it was. I'll give you this. It was star-studded. Heath Ledger. This is one of his first big performances. You know, Chris Cooper's in this film. This is before his Oscar win too.
Before adaptation, yeah.
And
Tom Wilkinson.
yeah, Tom Wilkinson, Jolie Richardson. There's a lot of big name people in this movie. But Pat, let's turn it to you. Why do you love The Patriot so much? Or why do you like The Patriot so much? Or why do you give it a chance for this reason?
I think for me, and this doesn't have to do with anything historically tied to it. For me, I've always been a fan of the battle scenes, the way they're able to kind of show us. And it's hard to say because you don't know how I'm sure there's definitely barbaric parts of the war, especially with battle and whatnot. I like how they show a lot more battle parts of battle scenes within the film. I also, a big thing with me when I watch movies is just camera work, how everything's shot. I think this film has some very beautiful shots throughout the whole movie. They really capture the landscape of where the war takes place, just the whole countryside of the US, or what it's supposed to be and everything. I believe the movie takes place in South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken, right? In that ballpark.
And
I'm pretty sure it's in Virginia, but it's based around Bannister Tarleton, who was really terrorizing South Carolina. It's one of those things where they movie flub it because I think they wanted to do Patrick Henry.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I
remember correctly, there's like a House of Burgesses thing.
I think by the time this movie was made, they had enough technology, and cinema has been around enough to, I think they kind of gave themselves an opportunity to try to create something that's never really been done before. Did they do a good job necessarily as far as the historical background? No, but I think as the general audience looks at it, and the people, except yourselves, as far as the historical people, right? The people that really pay attention to the specifics of the war itself. I think they did a pretty decent job as far as capturing certain moments of the movie. Now, also within those moments, like we were talking about earlier, I think off air, there's obviously cheesy moments within the movie that I hate, right? There's cringy parts of it that I hate, but God damn it. But like I really do like Mel Gibson's performance in this movie. There's certain parts of it that, like I said, are a little cringy, like the whole daughter part where, his daughter's not talking to him. I think it's kind of weird, just a filler. Does this movie, and Brandon, I want to ask you just a quick side note. Do you really think this movie needs to be 2 hours and 55 minutes long?
Oh, hell no. This should have been less than 2 hours. I'm sorry. Like, just
give it like 2:15 maybe, but 2:55 seems like a lot.
When you go over 2 hours and 30 minutes, unless you're Gettysburg and get away with it, that movie should have never been made into near a 3-hour film. I'm sorry. I think that's my deterrent.
And even Gettysburg left in a truck.
What'd you say?
There's a truck in one of the scenes in Gettysburg, like an old Ford pickup truck. You can see it in the background of
And
one
they
of
didn't
the
even bother
battlefield
like editing it
shots.
out.
It's my favorite Easter egg to look for every time I watch Gettysburg.
Love that.
Sorry, I couldn't resist because I know Brandon geeks every time I bring it up.
Good.
You actually showed me the scene, and so now every time I watch it, I cannot just sit there and not see the white pickup truck in the background and think, hey, at least everything else was historically accurate. We at least got that portion.
It's great. Um sorry.
But I agree. I do not think that movie should have been 3 hours long.
No.
No
Yeah.
way
Yeah.
should have been that long.
I don't think this is the greatest. I don't think this is the greatest performance we got from Heath Ledger. He was really young at this point.
This is his first big role. This is
10 Things I Hate About You was before this.
oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, 'cause I think because 10 Things I Hate About You, I want to say is like 98 or 99.
yeah, and this came out
I think it was
2000, and then
99.
The Knight's Tale came
Yeah.
out shortly after.
But I mean, I'm not a big fan of Gabriel, or he plays Gabriel Martin, but Heath Ledger's character in the film, it's kind of like a whatever character to me. But I think the one that really steals the show, in my opinion, is Jason Isaacs. Uh, he's a perfect bad guy in this. Whenever I watch him, I think this is before we got him as Lucius Malfoy,
Yeah,
right?
this is we showed up in Lucius Malfoy in 2002, 2003 time frame.
Yeah, Chamber of Secrets, I believe, was the first movie he was in. But I think this was kind of like a precursor of what he was capable of as far as a villain goes. You know what I mean? Portraying a villain. And I think, God, man, he's just so good in this movie. I hate him so much. It makes me want to punch him in the face. But that's just that's how he's good. He's good as William Tavington in this. Chris Cooper as Harry Burwell, also really good. I would say though, after watching this, before getting prepped for this, I would say Chris Cooper's part is kind of subpar as well, just because there's not a whole lot of Chris Cooper in this compared to, like you were saying, adaptation or something else along those lines.
American Beauty is another good one.
Yeah. But again, too, I think my favorite part of watching this is just the way they capture the scenery in this movie. It's really beautifully shot. I love the old colonial style homes that they have built in. I don't know if they have those built themselves for the set. I would imagine so. Maybe they use some kind of historical landmarks within the movie. I'm not 100% sure on that either.
So I'm pretty sure it was filmed in Virginia. There are a lot of extant Georgian style homes there, but also that was a very popular construction style that was fairly resistant to southern weather patterns.
Okay.
And so it was pretty typically used well into the 19th century, where we still have a lot of like standing versions. Also, people will tend to use any house that's not Victorian and be like, look, 18th century. It's not always true, but it can look close enough.
Yeah.
I took a historic preservation class. I'm so sorry. I had to learn architectural styles. I have
You're
the
good.
weirdest
No,
background.
No, I just like it hurts my heart whenever the scene where they're looking for Heath Ledger's character because he's with the colonials and they're chasing him and whatnot, and they end up burning his house. They end up burning Mel Gibson's house, and I'm like, man, that's such a beautiful home. Why would you burn that? It's terrible. What a waste.
See,
But
here's my problem. I'm gonna change the subject with Jason.
I know.
Jason Isaacs. Okay, mind you. Okay, I watched this about not even a year later. He shows up in Black Hawk Down as well.
Oh, that's right. He's in
He's the bald-headed sergeant major. It's one of those moments that it's like, I can't look past you other than being a villain. Like,
I think he's in Armageddon too, I want to say.
Watch him. It's
Okay.
like it's one of those movies like when you watch him in Induction. Yeah, I watched that movie, fans. Don't judge me. That's a terrible movie. It's why Taylor Lautner doesn't have a career a lot anymore. That movie was terrible. Anyway, I can't look at him and not think villain. Like, I can't look at him without, now with the Patriot, I can't look him past being a villain. That's why I thought like his role in Harry Potter, fantastic, great.
Yeah, it kind of solidified. I think the Patriot kind of solidified what his career was going to be as far as the characters he
But,
played.
but I do want to
He would
turn
make
to
a really good Magneto.
yeah. Oh, that would be
And he's
interesting.
actually Jewish, which means it's a decent Magneto and not what a lot of people are doing.
I don't. Yeah, I could actually see that. I forgot about that, and we don't have
Anyway,
it yet. But I want to turn it over to Mary because you did bring up a good point about Jason Isaac's character. And
yeah, so this was actually pointed out to me by one of my friends, Dr. Robbie McDiven, who has a PhD in British war studies in war history, focusing on the American Revolution from the University of Edinburgh. He currently writes for Warhammer 40K, but he is an academic historian and he's very dear to me. But he is obsessed with the historical figure of Bannister Tarleton, who was kind of the scourge of the American Southern colonies in the Revolution. And Jason Isaac's character, Tavington, is based on Tarleton, and not very well. And this is not to say that Bannister Tarleton was not responsible for some atrocities. There were a lot of atrocities. But it kind of the Americans are really good at making things up. I mentioned propagandists earlier. Um, they're really good at lying. And about Bannister Tarleton is no exception. We do have fairly good records from the British about kind of what was happening and what they were doing. And we do have some American numbers and figures. There were a lot of loyalists in the Southern colonies, which is always, it seems to surprise people more than it should. But so we have some fairly good numbers that kind of disprove a lot of the American propaganda surrounding Tarleton. And the Patriot kind of plays into all of the propaganda about Tarleton, which is interesting because there is almost no public perception of Bannister Tarleton. Like, if you walked up to someone on the street and you were like, hey, what's your opinion on Bannister Tarleton from the Revolution? They would not have any idea of who that man is or what he did. I was introduced to Bannister Tarleton by Robbie. So, and I enjoy learning about the American Revolution. And so like it was a really interesting choice. And by interesting I mean weird. Because there are so many other things that they could have done, and I feel like the Patriot missed the mark in quite a few ways. And not just in terms of like the historical inaccuracy, but first of all, I'm gonna get this out of the way. I don't like Mel Gibson. I don't think he's talented. I don't think his movies are good. I hate Braveheart so much.
So I have to ask you, you probably have heard us talk about how much I don't care for George Clooney. Is he your George Clooney?
Yeah.
Clooney is me.
I don't like him. He's very overrated, and it's not good. The biggest disappointment for me is that, and I think it's really interesting, the American Revolution is so often framed as a Boston thing. I thought it was really weird that the Patriot is based around Virginia.
Right.
Like, what is the purpose here? Like, I guess they were trying to harken to like Montpelier, Monticello, and Mount Vernon, but like,
You know what it could be too, and I'm people nowadays thinking about this. I should you not, but think about the football team, the New England Patriots. Where are they based out of? Boston.
yeah, and like,
I mean, maybe there's some correlation with that where you think of like, oh, it's supposed to be Massachusetts or in that area.
and so much of the war was fought in the northern colonies. And Massachusetts started the revolution. It was them. They did that. And I feel like this is kind of where the Patriot lost me from the get-go, is that first of all, the title of the movie would make so much more sense because keeping in mind, of course, that the 13 colonies were essentially independent states that all had their own currency.
Yep.
They were essentially completely different countries that were all under the rule of the British Empire. And what made the revolution as cool and unifying as it was is that you did have men from Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia traveling to Massachusetts to fight in a conflict that their colony or commonwealth did not start. And so what I feel like what the Patriot loses is that it does not address the national element of the revolution to the extent that it could. Because I feel like a lot of the tragedy of the revolution, not quite to the extent of the American Civil War, where obviously the geographical distance is much larger, and there's the Victorian culture of like the good death, where there are manuals on how to die, and so that's where the American ghost story comes from. But you have young men, like 15, 16, 17, traveling hundreds of miles,
Yep.
and dying in a colony they have never been to before for a cause their colony did not start,
I
trying to make one nation.
I agree with you in that.
And I feel like The Patriot would be a stronger film, no matter the other historical inaccuracies, if it acknowledged that truth.
Right. Now, I agree with you that because I think the only scene we really get with that somewhat is the party scene that they have in, I think it's Georgia that they have it in. Georgia or South. I can't remember the scene, but it was a party and you could see like they let off a whole bunch of fireworks and did a whole bunch of stuff to like bomb, like, you know, just like kind of like they did. I can't remember the scenes. That scene I kind of just rolled over.
Are you talking about when they bombed the ship?
Yeah, that's what they what's its face?
They're at the party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only thing you really get with that. And then the rest of it, I agree. All of them were all their own separate countries. At this point, some of them were even wanting to enter the war. Some didn't want to do it at all.
No.
Not that. It's one of the
Pennsylvania was extremely contentious even during the Continental Congress.
So I think my problem with Mel Gibson's character, I want to go back to that, is that really he's kind of a mixture of many people throughout history. One of them I want to bring up
He's
is
also just an asshole, but yeah.
but it's one of the main ones is Francis Marion. Now, Francis Marion is one of the main people in the United States military that actually started teaching people guerrilla tactics and warfare.
Which really weren't all that impactful, by the way. Don't know if you knew that. They didn't do much.
I'm not denying that. Now, there's also another person I want to bring up too that I feel like he's more based off of, and that's Major Roberts Rogers. The
Rogers.
The Rogers Rangers. This is kind of where the Army Rangers that you know and love really get their kind of their heritage from. And I do feel like that is more Gibson in this compared to anything else. Like, because he was his own militia, which that was Rogers. Rogers did have his own militia at one point. That to me speaks more volumes there than Marion and a few of the other people that they mentioned here.
And even then, Turn did it better.
It's one of those things that I look at the Patriot and go simple. I agree with Mary with the fact being the location of it, I feel was a miss. I feel like you could have had it in places like Massachusetts, even Philadelphia at one point. You could have moments like that where it's more patriotic. And you go to
I don't care if they're from Virginia, and I don't care if we start in Virginia and we have the Patrick Henry stuff and we talk about the House of Burgesses. I don't care. But the revolution was impactful because it was one of the first big national movements.
Yeah.
And the national element is so important.
Now, the other thing I want to bring up with this movie, there is so much humor in this movie that it's just like I feel like it takes the humor in it takes away from the movie.
It does. No, it does.
When
For
you,
sure.
when you have the guy with the little you know, trying to listen in. When
Can I write to her?
The other big part to me, the dog scene when they're saying like, "Oh yeah, we eat dog," and the Reverend's looking at him like, "You eat dog?" And he goes, "Yeah, it makes a fine, tasty meal." And then the guy, you know, it's just those stupid.
Didn't need to be in there.
Yeah, those are the moments. These are the moments that could have lessened your movie, You
Yeah.
didn't need the dog scene. Yeah, the dog scene played a
And
pivotal.
you could have, and the thing is that there is a real life American Revolution dog scene
Yeah,
that pays significantly more attention to the desire of the American generals to be viewed as British upper class. Just when George Washington returns an enemy's dogs,
yeah. They actually made.
pauses a battle to return another man's dogs.
Yeah, he. What was it? They actually made that into a children's book at one point. I actually
Yeah.
read the children's book at one point like that. It's it actually. And I thought, there's no way this is true. And I went and research. It is a true statement. It is
Yeah.
something real that happened. It's one of those things, like, this is why movies like The Patriot is kind of like what Mary said too. They over fixate the violence of it to the point where then people watch. It's like you say, you like that action, Patrick. You like all that.
Yeah.
But for Mary and I, we look at the historical context. And even though okay, good movie, I want to bring it up quick because it is a Mel Gibson film, but Mel Gibson is not in it. He directs it. It's Hacksaw Ridge. When
Mhm.
you really look at the context of it, the historical part is actually really well done. But when you really
And I think, coming from the academic history perspective, I think part of my issue with movies that take no pains to present things accurately, while especially when they serve as like the main introduction to something in pop culture, like The Patriot does,
Mhm.
is that most people are not me. They are not going to go into an archive. They are not going to get their ID scanned. They are not going to read the primary source documents. They did not pay attention in history class. They have no interest in reading history. They want to be passively entertained by history, and that's it. And I feel like filmmakers who are engaging with these themes have a base responsibility, especially when they are serious themes involving the loss of human life, especially on such a grand scale, to present things somewhat accurately. And I'm not saying it has to be perfect, because that's just an impossibility when interpreting the past. There is no such thing as a subjective history. Oh, objective history, not subjective. All history is subjective. Um, but can you tell I've been up since 5:30 a.m.? It's 10:11 here, guys.
Jeez.
Um, but so, and I feel like even when you're looking at other films which do have comedy elements, like Django Unchained, right? There is no point in that movie where you are deluded into believing that the institution of chattel slavery is anything other than horrific.
Yeah.
It is a comedy movie. It has a lot of gratuitous violence. At no point are you in any way misinformed about how horrific chattel slavery is. Hell, even Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter is better researched than The Patriot. But yeah, and I feel like we have so many war movies that glorify and almost deify really horrible people. And I feel like that's kind of where the American Revolution can shine, by focusing on the common soldier rather than on a general or a landed person. Um, because there are so many ordinary people figures. And I think even if you are wanting to take, even like in the current pop culture climate, where you are wanting to take a story about someone who is progressive from the past, there are so many American revolutionary figures you can do that with without having to change major parts of their story. Um, Speaking with Nathan Hale, because I'm very familiar with him, he illegally ran an underground school for women in Connecticut. He educated women when he wasn't allowed to, because he believed that they deserved self-determination. And then he went on to serve in the revolution and died because he was so bad at being a spy. And like there are so many ways that you can portray the past and tell the stories that you want to tell. You just have to put the, like, and I think it's wild to me, because if you really wanted to tell a story like The Patriot, you don't have to tell it in the American Revolution. William Barker Cushing in the Civil War is already there.
Yep.
Mhm.
He blew up a Confederate ironclad ship with a torpedo he attached to an elaborate fishing pole setup.
Like,
Okay? Those people exist. You just have to look for them. And there are a million historians. There are so many people with history degrees who would pay you, who would donate their time to help you tell that story if you asked.
Yep.
Like I would cast Dan Stevens as William Barker Cushing in a movie because he'd be really, really good at it and he looks the part. But there are so many figures from the past who deserve a good movie, who deserve a chance at having themselves presented.
yeah.
And I feel like The Patriot played too hard into what Mel Gibson thinks is his strength.
Yes.
Mhm.
And that, I mean, if we have to say it, The Patriot is to American history what Braveheart is to Scotland. They don't like it. I don't know if you know this.
I
Does
remember
anyone,
I know a fair amount of Scottish people. They don't like Braveheart, and
Brandon,
nor should they.
it's
Brandon,
not.
did you catch when you were watching this, prepping for this podcast, that I never realized that Mel Gibson is basically hooking up with his widowed wife's sister.
Yeah, that's a weird situation for me.
Seriously, dude, like this guy's
I
just
don't like in the movie, but it, you can see it from the beginning when they see each other. They have the hots for each other, so it's like,
they just but they gotta throw that kind of romance in there, right? That's another thing I hate about war movies, or just any kind of movie that doesn't really need it, but they just gotta throw it in there to make it
well, I
interesting.
think, but I
And
hate to,
then there are figures who, not to keep bringing up the American Civil War, I just have it on my mind.
yeah,
But like the Sullivan Ballou letter,
yes,
someone wrote a 600-page book about that letter. I own that book. It's wonderful. But like, if you're gonna tell a weird love story, tell that one. Don't invent one.
yeah. I agree. There's so much what we do have stuff from the American Revolution that I do feel would be beneficial. We see it in documentaries, we see letters, we see things like that. Why can't we get more stuff like that? That's the whole thing that I feel when it comes to American Revolution. This is why I think this is my distaste for that. Because I agree with Pat. When you look at a movie like this, yeah, you want the action, you want that patriotism feel. But is it really patriotism that you're feeling? Or is it a misguided way to look at history? And I think that's the
And
problem.
there are figures you can look at in the revolution that will fill you with patriotism. You just have to look
Or
potentially outside of the founding fathers.
agreed. And I think that's the main reason why I don't care for it. I feel the whole movie, when you really look at the aspect of it, I don't like the family. I do feel the family takes away from it. Actually, that's where I feel not even only the daughter, I just feel cringe throughout the film with the family. When the
It's
family,
also, Brandon, I don't know if you've picked this up, but they are not telling an American Revolution story, really.
well,
What they're trying to do with the whole family narrative is they're trying to tell a Civil War story.
yes, agreed.
But this Gettysburg had come out by that point.
That's why I said this movie, I can understand why people love this movie. And I've heard that. But the thing is that when you really look at the context of it, it makes you feel good from the moment. But like people like us who study history and stuff, you see those inaccuracies. You see those points that go, that movie could be 10 times better if they didn't do this. And I think that's the problem. And especially with Mel Gibson, it's like we said, Braveheart was a big movie for him, but that wasn't historically accurate either.
Mhm.
That movie, was for the sword fighting, fights, glory, all those moments. But it wasn't made with the intentions of let's show a pretty accurate historical film. And I think that's a problem with movies nowadays. It's like, or in that time frame compared to now, because I think now we've had those moments where we have directors go, hey, let's take the time and actually research this. We're not going to get everything right, but we're going to do the best we can. And that's the whole thing is that when you take, it's like Mary says, when you take that time to actually research and dive down into it more, you're going to find more interesting stories that you can tell. This is why I said I do think American Revolution can be profitable, but again, it has to be the right story.
Mhm.
Don't just tell us a story about
Yeah.
George Washington. Tell us something about somebody else. You know,
Well, even like
And
even if I think they could easily do something, obviously a fictional story, but intertwine good historical movements within it, and do it right. I don't think they necessarily need to do a historical piece if they don't want to.
right.
I there's so much potential for this, and it's just a shame, in my opinion, that it hasn't been utilized more, I guess, over the
or if you're
years.
and also like if you're going to make stuff up, lean into the ridiculousness of making stuff up. My thesis advisor, who literally kicked people out of class for praising the Patriot, told me to watch a short film called The Washingtonians, where people obsessed with George Washington are cannibals who dress up like George Washington and lure people into their homes to eat them.
I remember you telling me about this, and I've been scared to
If you're going to be ridiculous with
Go all
pride.
out.
It's the
Go
same
all
thing with
out.
the Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, right? That's kind of the whole thing of that too. But there's still
And the crazy about thing, okay, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies was bad, but Seth Graham Smith is actually really good at research. It kind of makes me mad because I have read Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter and the sequel, The Last American Vampire. They are unfortunate, like I don't want to say unfortunately very good because that feels like I'm being really mean to Seth Graham Smith, and I'm not. But like they're very good, they're well written. There is incredible suspension of disbelief, and he actually knows what he's doing. It's and like there are like you can lean into it. My guilty pleasure is really really bad historical fiction and classic lit with monsters. It's my vice. I recently bought Little Women and Werewolves. Uh, and but like there are so many like ways to just do the revolution well. And like even as someone like I worked at Mount Vernon, I used to send educational emails out on a mailing list for teachers. That was part of my job. And like you see people now, like when we're looking at the period dramas coming out of Europe, right? We are really seeing a family focused ones. Downton Abbey is one of the most profitable ever.
Mhm.
People really enjoy adoptive family narratives. They like wife guys. Boy, do I have some news for you about George Washington. He is the dad who stepped up. He's obsessed with his wife. Um, like you could make if you have to do George Washington, you could
Mhm.
even just make a Washington family show, and it doesn't even have to really be about the war. It can touch on the war. I mean, obviously his stepson dies in the war, but like you can tell the story of focusing on the family while incorporating these other elements, and that gives you plenty of time to dramatize and to play with the ridiculous amount of extant sources that we have on the Washingtons. It gives you fantastic opportunities to talk about the institution of chattel slavery, which is really well documented at Mount Vernon. And it gives you time to talk about politics and everything that people are trying to put into everything these days. It gives you the perfect opportunity to do all of that. And people aren't doing it because it's work.
Right.
Yeah, and that's like you're saying, it's the capability of people, right? I mean, it's another one where you can compare, let's just say Brandon Saving Private Ryan, right? It's a fictional story, right? They're trying to find this specific soldier through all this chaos, but yet we have in the very first scene of the film a pretty good
It's probably one of the most accurate.
reenacting of D-Day, and the fact that they're able to put a historical event such as that took place in a war. I mean,
Well,
like
it's
Mary
just
was
like I
saying,
said, like Enemy at the Gates was another good example of that.
yeah,
Really look at that first scene is Battle of Stalingrad. That is one of the most bloodiest battles you would ever see in World War II.
Mhm.
And then the rest of it is based off a real guy, but even then it's somewhat fictional because you have those moments like, okay, this is like this, but that's the whole thing, and I agree with that. So I want to thank Mary for coming on to the podcast. I think this is a good way to head out of this because
Mhm.
we could sit here for hours and talk about it. But fans,
I got one more question for Mary. Just one more question.
all right.
And you have to give me an answer.
Oh boy.
If you had to pick one thing and you have to pick one thing and one thing only, what's one thing you do like about the Patriot?
The scenery is nice.
Thank you. That was perfect. Anyway, thank you again, Mary. Thank you for everything tonight. Brandon, you can finish this one out if you'd like.
Thank you for coming on to the podcast. You can check Mary and myself out at Comic Talkers, where we do fun comic book discussions. If you like more historical context, we actually even have a history through comics section on our YouTube channel. So
Which we are going to be starting back up soon.
Yep, we got one coming out. We actually had one come out in September because this is in November. We got one coming. We came out in September. We did the 12 situation. We've done Siegfried and the Dragon, Slayer. We've done DC the New Frontier. So fans, go check us out. Check out J4F Podcast at Instagram and TikTok. Also check us out on Spotify for other great movie content. And without further ado, my name is Brandon.
I am Patty B. We just got to remember that we do it just for flicks.